Hello, children. I'm happy to be back. Today, we're going to be looking at stories from William Shakespeare. These tales are tales written by other authors in contemporary English for you children to understand. And I hope you're going to enjoy today's story. Today, the title of my story in Lamb Tales from Shakespeare is Macbeth. Let's move on. The Witch's Prophecy. When Duncan the Meek reigned King of Scotland, there lived a great lord called Macbeth. This Macbeth was a near kinsman to the king, and in great honor at court for his courage in the wars. The two Scottish generals, Macbeth and Banquo, returning victorious from a great battle, were stopped by three strange figures, like women, except that they had beards, and their faded skins and wild dress made them look not like any earthly creatures. Macbeth first addressed them, but they laid each one her finger upon her skinny lips for silence, and the first of them called Macbeth by the name of Lord of Glamis. The general was much surprised to find himself known by such creatures, but how much more when the second of them gave him the name of Lord of Cawdor, to which honor he had no claim. And again the third called to him, All hail King that shall be hereafter. Such a prophecy might well surprise him, for he knew that while the king's sons lived, he could not hope to succeed to the throne. Then turning to Banquo, they pronounced him, in a sort of riddle, to be lesser than Macbeth, and greater, not so happy, but much happier, and prophesied that though he should never reign, yet his sons after him should be kings in Scotland. They then turned into air and vanished, by which the generals knew them to be witches. While they stood thinking on these strange things, there arrived certain messengers from the king, who were sent by him to give Macbeth the name and title of Cawdor, an event so strangely like the prophecy of the witches filled Macbeth with wonder, and he stood surprised, unable to make reply to the messengers. And in that moment of time, swelling hopes arose in his mind that the prophecy of the third witch might in like manner be fulfilled, and that he should one day reign king in Scotland. Turning to Banquo, he said, Do you now hope that your children shall be kings? When what the witches promised to me has so wonderfully come to pass? That hope, answered the general, might move you to aim at the throne, but often these ministers of darkness tell us truth in little things to lead us into evil deeds. But the words of the witches had sunk too deep into the mind of Macbeth to allow him to attend to the warnings of the good Banquo. But from that time, he bent all his thoughts on how to win the throne of Scotland. Let's look at Lady Macbeth now. Macbeth had a wife, to whom he told the strange prophecy of the witches, and what had followed. She was a bad woman, who desired a high place for herself and him, and if only her husband and herself could arrive at greatness, cared not much by what means. She urged on Macbeth, and did not cease to tell him that the murder of the king was quite necessary to fulfillment of the prophecy. It happened at this time that the king came to Macbeth's house, attended by his two sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, and a large train of lords and attendants to honor Macbeth for his success in the wars. Now let's look at Macbeth again. The castle of Macbeth was built in a pleasant place. The air about it was so sweet and healthy. Swallows had made their nest upon the walls of the building, and where those birds most build and hunt, the air is known to be soft. The king entered, well pleased with the place, and not less so with the attentions and respect of his honored hostess, Lady Macbeth, who had the art of covering wicked purposes with smiles, and could look like the innocent flower, while she was indeed the serpent under it. The king, being tired with his journey, went early to bed, and in his stateroom 2 servants, as was the custom, slept beside him. He had been unusually pleased with his welcome, and had made presents. Before he went to his room, to his principal officers, and among the rest, had sent a rich diamond to Lady Macbeth, greeting her by the name of his most kind hostess. Hmm. The murder of the king. The murder planned. Now was the middle of night, when over half the world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams trouble men's minds asleep, and none but the wolf and the murderer is about. This was the time when Lady Macbeth woke to plan the murder of the king. What a wicked woman! She would not have undertaken a deed so unnatural in a woman, but that she feared her husband's nature, that it was too full of milk of human kindness to do murder. She knew him to have high desires, but he feared wrongdoing, and was not yet prepared for a great height of crime. She had won him to consent to the murder, but she doubted his firmness, and she feared that the natural tenderness of his heart, more gentle than her own, would come between, and defeat the purpose. So, with her own hands armed with a knife, she approached the king's bed, having taken care to make his servants drunk and careless of their charge. There lay Duncan in a sound sleep after the labors of his journey, but as she looked closely at him, there was something in his face as he slept which made her think of her own father, and she had not the heart to proceed. She returned to speak with her husband. Treacherous woman! His resolve had begun to grow weak. He now considered that there were strong reasons against the deed. In the first place, he was not only a subject, but a near kinsman to the king. He had been his host that day, and it was a host's duty to shut the door against his murderers, not bear the knife himself. Then he thought how just and merciful a king this Duncan had been, how clear of wrong towards his subjects, how loving towards his nobles, and in particular to him, that such kings are the peculiar care of heaven, and their subjects doubly bound to punish those that hurt them. Besides, by the favours of the king, Macbeth stood high in the opinion of all sorts of men, and how would these honours be stained by the name of so foul a murder? Hmm. So Lady Macbeth found her husband turning to the better part, and resolving to proceed no further. But she was a woman not easily shaken from her evil purpose. She began to pour in at his ears words which breathed a portion of her own spirit into his mind. She gave reason upon reason why he should not turn for what he had promised, how easy the deed was, how soon it would be over, and how the action of one short night would give to all their nights and days to come kingship and royal power. Then she laughed at the chance of purpose, ha 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 ha, and called him inconstant and a coward. She declared that she had given suck, and knew how tender it was to love the babe that milked her, but she would, while it was smiling in her face, have plucked it from her breast, and dashed his brains out if she had sworn to do it, as he had sworn to perform that murder. Then she added how easy it was to lay the guilt of the deed upon the drunken slippery servants, and with the courage of her tongue, she so urged him that he once more made himself brave to do the bloody business. So, taking the dagger in his hand, he softly stole in the dark to the room where Duncan lay. But as he went, he thought he saw another dagger in the air, with the handle towards him, and on the blade, and at the points of it drops of blood. And when he tried to take it, it was nothing but air, a mere fantasy, rising from his own heart and loaded brain and the business he had in hand. Mm. What a treacherous man! What a wicked woman! Let's look at the murder. Putting away his fear, he entered the king's room and killed him with one stroke of his dagger, just as he had done the murder. One of his servants, who slept in the chamber, laughed in his sleep, and the other cried, "Murder!" which woke them both. But they said a short prayer. One of them said, "God bless us," and the other answered, "Amen," and turned to sleep again. Macbeth, who stood listening to them, tried to say amen when the fellow said, "God bless us." But though he had most need of a blessing, there was stuck in his throat, and he could not say it. Again he thought he heard a voice which cried, "Sleep no more, Macbeth doth murder sleep, the innocent sleep. That is the nurse of life." Still it cried, "Sleep no more," to all the house. Glamis had murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more. With such horrible fancies in his mind, Macbeth returned to his listening wife, who began to think he had failed of his purpose, and left the deed undone. He came in so ordered a state that she blamed him for want of firmness, and sent him to wash his hands of the blood which stained them. She herself took his knife so as to stain the cheeks of the servants with blood, to make it seem their guilt. Morning came, and with it the discovery of the murder, which could not be concealed. Macbeth and his lady made great show of grief, and the proofs against the servants were sufficiently strong. Yet all thought Macbeth had done the deed, since his motives were so much stronger than that such poor silly servants could be supposed to have. And Duncan's two sons fled, Malcolm, the eldest, to the English court, and the youngest, Donalbain, to Ireland. The king's sons, who should have succeeded him, having thus left the throne empty, Macbeth was crowned king, and thus the prophecy of the witches was exactly fulfilled. Banquo's ghosts. Though placed so high, Macbeth and his queen could not forget the other prophecy, that though Macbeth should be king, yet not his children, but the children of Banquo should be kings after him. The thought of this and that they had fouled their hands with blood, and done so great crimes, only to place the children of Banquo upon the throne, so worked within them that they resolved to put death, both Banquo and his son. For this purpose they made a great supper, to which they invited all the chief lords, and among the rest, which marks of particular respect, Banquo and his son Fleance were invited. Banquo, passing to place at night, was set upon and stabbed by murderers, put there by Macbeth. But in the fight, Fleance escaped. At supper, the queen, whose manners were in the highest degree friendly and royal, played the hostess with a great grace, fullness, and attention, which pleased everyone present, and Macbeth spoke freely with his lords and nobles, saying that all that was honorable in the country was under his roof, all but his good friend Banquo. Just as these words, the ghost of Banquo, whom he had caused to be murdered, entered the room and placed himself on the chair where Macbeth was about to sit. Though Macbeth was a bold man, and one that could have faced the devil without trembling, at this horrible sight his cheeks turned white with fear, and he stood quite shaking with his eyes fixed upon the ghost. His queen and all the nobles, who only saw him looking, as they thought, upon an empty chair, took it for a fit of madness. But Macbeth continued to see the ghost, and gave no heed to all they could say, but addressed it with mad words, yet so full of meaning that his queen, fearing the dreadful secret would be made known, in great haste sent away the guest, excusing the weakness of Macbeth, as the sickness he was often troubled with. Of such dreadful fancies, Macbeth's mind now was full. His queen and he had their sleep broken with terrible dreams, and the blood of Banquo troubled them not more than the escape of Fleance, whom now they looked upon as father to a line of kings, who should keep their children out of the throne. With these miserable thoughts they found no peace, and there is no peace for the wicked, and Macbeth resolved once more to seek out the witches and know from them to the worst. after you've killed King Duncan, you're now seeking for another prophecy. The witches again. He sought them in a cave in a wild part of the country, where they, who knew by foresight of his coming, were making their dreadful charms by which they called up the spirits of the dead to show to them the future. Their horrid mixture was made of toads, bats, and serpents, the eye of a newt, and the tongue of a dog, the leg of a lizard, and the wing of the night owl, the scale of a dragon, the touch of a wolf, the belly of the salt sea shark, the dried flesh of a witch, the rot of a poisonous plant, dog in the dark, the gall of a goat, and the liver of a Jew, with little pieces of yew tree that roots itself in graves, and the finger of a dead child. All these were set on to boil in a great kettle, which, as fast as it grew too hot, was cooled with a baboon's blood. To this they poured in the blood of a sow that had eaten her young. By these charms, they said, they bound the spirit of the dead to answer their questions. They asked Macbeth whether he would have his doubts removed by them, or by their masters, the spirits. He, not at all frightened by the dreadful things he saw, boldly answered, "Where are they? Let me see them." And they called the spirits, which were three. At the first arose in the likeness of an armed head, and he called Macbeth by name, and bade him beware of the Lord of Fife. And Macbeth thanked him, for he hated Macduff, the Lord of Fife. And the second spirit arose in the likeness of a bloody child, and he called Macbeth by name, and bade him have no fear, but laugh at the power of man, for none of woman born should have power to hurt him. And he advised him to be bloody, bold, and brave. "Then leave, Macduff," cried the king. "Why need I fear thee? But yet I will make safety doubly safe. Thou shalt not live, that I may tell pale-hearted fear, it lies, and sleep in spite of thunder." That spirit being sent away, a third arose in the form of a child, crowned with a tree in his hand. He called Macbeth by name, and comforted him, saying he should never be frightened. How can a man who is a brave soldier be cowed by his wife? That is the story of Macbeth. What happened? He was defeated. The witches lied. Macbeth was killed. His wife also committed suicide. And that's the end of my story of Macbeth, simplified by lab tales from Shakespeare. So what is the moral in this story? I always give morals, whether it is British story or a Nigerian story. Being too ambitious sometimes can be dangerous. Let's do good. Don't be cowed into doing evil things, even if it's a family member that is giving you the counsel. Until next time, children, we'll meet. Take care and God bless you. Please subscribe to get more stories from Dula. Thank you.